All right, welcome everybody. This is a special meeting of the Darien Sewer Commission on February 15th, 2002. We're calling the meeting to order at 4:36 p.m. It's being held virtually only with the town's go-to meeting platform as printed on the agenda, posted with the town clerk. I don't have the agenda in front of me, but I think somebody does. We would move to introduce.
Gotta love Darren. Just gotta love him.
Yeah, I can't.
I tech.
Hold on. I'll give you a second. I'm just going to open the agenda and I'll read from there. There we go. Yeah, item number 2 on the agenda, the Infiltration and Inflow Study Report Review and Presentation by Arcadis. Welcome. We have our everybody, our whole core team at Arcadis on the call. So happy to see you, and we're happy to hear your presentation.
Well, we are very glad to be here, but Ed, I'll let you.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna. Craig was doing really good there, so I'll give you an overview quickly. On the call here with us tonight is we have Scott Haynes, we have Vanessa McPherson, Lindsay McCarthy, and Cameron Jenkins, all of Team Arcadis, if you will, have done a fantastic job with this report. I think as I've read through it, impressed with the amount of information. I think you folks are going to be the same. I do want to mention that on the call also with us today is Rolf Olben, who is the chairman of the Public Works Committee. And I do recognize Jeff Kraus, I believe is his name. And he is, I think, a new member of the Public Works Committee. So I think he joined in today to take a look at what we're doing. So that should be everyone, I believe. And Penny, thank you, Penny, for putting your name in there. So without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa. She's going to take us through the presentation.
And just to keep background noise down, I would ask anybody that's not a part of the presentation to mute for now. Do we want to do questions after, out of my preference, or questions as we go?
We're good either way. I think if something comes up that requires kind of an immediate response to move forward, we welcome you to stop us. That's totally fine. We will try to keep our presentation part as brief as possible to allow for a hearty Q&A afterwards, but whatever works for you guys, we're good either way.
So I'll invite members if they're not if they're not understanding something as the presentation is moving forward, to interject to make sure as the information is conveyed we have a full understanding of it. But in terms of kind of thoughtful questions, I'm going to ask you to hold to the end when we start having our conversation now. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Craig. So yeah, and just for some context, what everyone has a copy of, or hopefully has had a chance to thumb through, is a draft version of our Sscs report. We really want this to be a working session, right? So our goal here is to present some high-level concept information to facilitate a discussion with all of you. So this is a summary of our infiltration and inflow program and sewer system evaluation survey for the Stony Brook and tributary sewer sheds in the town of Darien. And hopefully I can advance my slide here. So an agenda up on the screen just to take us through what we're going to cover. I'll start us with a really brief health and safety moment, and then we'll move into the project background, overview, and purpose. I'll turn it over to Lindsay McCarthy, our project engineer, who will go through a summary of the II metering program and the findings from our Sscs investigations. And Lindsay will also cover the rehab recommendations that are contained in the draft report. Scott Haynes, our technical expert, will go through a framework that we developed for rehab cost estimate and schedule, and then I'll wrap it up with next steps as we see it. So pertinent health and safety moment here, being that a lot of the infrastructure that we were looking at on this project was in roadways, is the coordination and planning that it really takes to safely do those inspections. Hopefully you can see here on the screen right next to the mailbox that we're looking at on Old Kings Highway South is a manhole cover, right? And this is a dangerous curve that Darren and Ed had brought to our attention when we were planning some work in this area. So communication is key, and depending on the location, control can be something simple like cones, or in a situation like this where it's really a dangerous curve, lane closures, flaggers, police detail, and safety really just being paramount in conducting field activities to make sure everyone goes home at the end of the day. So background. I think everyone on this call is very familiar with the information up here on the slide. We just have a map of the town and some stats on the sewer infrastructure, the collection system in the town of Darien. So about 84 miles of gravity sewer, ranging in size from 8 to 24 inch, 10 miles of low pressure sewer pipe, 4 miles of force main, around 2,500 manholes, 14 pump stations, and then an average flow of just over 2 million gallons per day going over to Stamford for treatment. So our current project, the II program, had several tasks associated with it. One being updates to the GIS system and some training for staff doing updates in GIS in real time, and that's ongoing. We're looking at capacity management, operation, and maintenance, or CMOM. That's another ongoing task. It's meant to be a living, breathing document with SOPs and emergency response protocols. And that task started with a series of interviews with DPW staff. So we're working on getting that CMOM document compiled. Pump station evaluations. We did inspections at all 14 pump stations. That summary report document is complete, and I know a lot of the more urgent repairs are already underway, right? Anything that we noticed that really required attention, the town has jumped right on. And then really the meat of today's presentation is going to be the flow monitoring and II analysis work that was done. So the meters that were installed and the data that we got, and then the findings of the Sscs investigations, right? And what everyone wants to know is, what do we do next? So just to give some context to the purpose, why would you embark on a program like this? And I think everyone's well aware because you chose to embark on this program. But having a II project really gives you a long-term vision into removing extraneous flow in your system, which can reduce cost first and foremost, right? You're not paying for flow that doesn't need to be treated, that is not wastewater. It enhances reliability of the system, extends the life of your assets, and most importantly, minimizes any backups or SSOs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to talk about the metering program.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
All right, good. Thanks, Vanessa. As Vanessa mentioned before, it was about a year and a half ago or so, we did present the detailed findings from the flow metering program. So right now, we just kind of want to give a quick refresher and summary of the findings that will kind of lead into the Sscs investigations and findings from that. So the first step of the I&I program was initiating a targeted flow monitoring program that really focused on Stony Brook Pump Station sewer shed and the tributary sewer shed. This study area encompassed about half of the town's collection system, and that's what's shown in that the teal color there. And it was prioritized due to the age and material of the system, historical issues, and system response during previous wet weather events of some of the reasons why this was prioritized. The targeted flow monitoring program started in spring 2020, and it was during high groundwater levels. The flow monitoring was performed to determine the flow characteristics within the study area, so that we could quantify infiltration during dry weather conditions and inflow during wet weather conditions. So in total, 9 flow meters were installed in the study area, and metering was conducted for a period of 8 weeks. Also, 2 groundwater gauges were installed in town, and that was to monitor groundwater levels and fluctuations during wet weather events. Also, 2 rain gauges were installed to collect rain data, and that was used to identify sanitary flow increases in response to storm events, and also then to ultimately quantify the amount of inflow in each meter area. So on the next slide, the results of the metering analysis were utilized to estimate the infiltration and inflow rates for each of the meter areas. Based on the results, those meter areas were prioritized to identify the high infiltration and high inflow meter areas. So in total, there were 6 meter areas identified to have either high infiltration, high inflow, or both, and that's what's displayed in the figure. So Leroy Avenue Upper and Mansfield Avenue Upper, which is also known as Brookside, those both had high infiltration and inflow, which is that orange color. Mansfield Avenue Lower, Mechanic Street, Stony Brook, those had high infiltration. That's that bright fuchsia color. And Corbin Dry was high inflow. And then there was 3 meter areas that were not identified to have high infiltration or high inflow, and that's kind of that yellow color. That's 5 Mile Road, West Avenue Upper, and West Avenue Lower. So the meter areas with high infiltration and or high inflow were recommended for follow-on field investigations, and that's as part of this sewer system evaluation survey. You'll hear us refer to it as the Sscs. And that's really to locate and quantify the actual sources of the infiltration and inflow, and to determine the best course of action to mitigate that I&I, and also to remediate defects. There's multiple field investigation techniques that are utilized as part of the follow-on SSCS investigations, and those are really recommended and tailored to the type of extraneous flow present within the meter area. So as part of this SSCS, 5 different field investigation programs were initiated to investigate those meter areas. So meter areas with high infiltration were included in flow isolation, CCTV, and manhole inspection programs, and meter areas with high inflow were selected for smoke testing and the building inspection program. And I just wanted to quickly note that flow isolation is really like the first step in the field investigations for high infiltration meter areas. This is really because the flow isolations, it's a cost-effective screening tool. It's used to isolate and identify the segments within that whole meter area that are contributing the high or excessive infiltration, and those segments that kind of require the more detailed and more expensive investigations, which is CCTV inspections. And also similarly for smoke testing, that's another very effective field investigation method for high inflow meter areas. And that was performed in those 3 high inflow meter areas to identify possible inflow sources. And then the more detailed dye testing and building inspections were performed to confirm those inflow sources. So now we can dive into the SSCS investigations and the findings. So after performing about 100,000 linear feet of flow isolation in those 5 meter areas, around 47,000 linear feet, or almost 50% of that was inspected as part of the CCTV program. So this does go to show what I just talked about, the importance of doing that initial first screening tool to really hone in on the areas that need the more detailed inspections. So for those of you who may not be aware of what CCTV entails, it involved inspecting the inside of the pipe. It's with a mobile remote operated camera. And while it's inside the pipe, it drives along the pipe and it can pan and tilt to get a closer look at like the defects and the features within the pipe. So as part of that CCTV inspection, the camera operator will stop at each defect and assign a NASCO grade to each of it, which is an industry standardized rating system. And you'll see how in the columns on the right, we reference it there, but just so you know that 1 indicates minor defects, or it's in good condition, unlikely to fail in the foreseeable future, and 5 being severe defects that have failed already or are likely to fail, possibly within the next 5 years or so. And quickly on our process, after all these pipes are inspected, our CADIS will review each video and inspection report to verify the defects and actually quantify the infiltration that we see. And in addition to review the overall the NASCO pipe rating. So with that, I kind of want to note that, like, as we're reviewing it, and if we see a critical defect or severe issue in the pipe or the manhole, we did notify the town, and they were able to address those as soon as possible. And we'll talk about some of those a few slides later on. So going to the table now, the estimated infiltration for those 5-meter areas that we were able to estimate was about 580,000 gallons per day. Those 2 middle columns there, it shows the percentage that each meter area contributes to the overall infiltration amount. So for example, Stony Brook is estimated to contribute about 28% of the total. Mansfield Avenue Upper contributes about 30% of that total. The last 2 columns, going back to talking about the NASCO pipe rating, the reason that we included the NASCO grade 3 or higher that's shown in this table is because these segments either had active infiltration or evidence of infiltration, or were kind of in fair or poor structural condition. And we'll talk about it later when we get to the recommended rehab, but basically anything with a NASCO rating of 3 or higher was typically recommended for rehabilitation to remove those sources or mitigate those sources of I&I, and to remediate the defects that might impact the operation of the system as a whole, and also those defects provide avenues for additional infiltration to enter the system. So we could move on to the manholes now. Another summary of our manhole findings. So the manhole inspection program also included internal inspections. This involved lowering a person into the manhole with a tripod, so that the way they were able to view and assess each component of the manhole, such as the wall, the floor, invert, pipe connections, chimney. We had a up close and personal look with those components and defects, and they were able to assign a defect grade for each of those individual components. And then similar to the CCTV program, our CADIS reviewed the inspection reports and the images for each manhole. And for those 5-meter areas in total, there was about 170,000 gallons per day of estimated infiltration. And if you can see, Stony Brook meter area contributed almost half of that infiltration. The last 2 columns, so for the NASCO grade, the 3 or higher here, it's a little different than the pipe rating. I just wanted to point this out, that it's not the overall manhole grade, but it indicates that at least one of the components in the manhole has that grade of 3 or higher. So it's not that the entire manhole is a 3, 3, 4, or 5. It could mean that, the walls are in good condition. Those have a 1 rating, but the floor is in very poor condition. It's falling apart and there's infiltration coming in, and that's a 5. So again, like, if there were any critical defects that were found, we notified the town, but that just kind of gives a perspective that it's not the entire manhole that's a 3, 4, or 5. It's just maybe a component that just needs to be focused on the rehabilitation.
Question.
Yes.
So some of these, infiltration estimates are based on the visual inspection. Does the visual inspection correlate generally with the findings of the flow metering analysis? Do we know that answer?
So the estimated infiltration here, so it includes both the active infiltration that we were able to see during the inspection. It also assigns an infiltration assumption number too. So if there was evidence of past infiltration, mineral deposits, staining, that's given an infiltration assumption. We're not seeing it at that time, but there is evidence that it was previously there. In addition, defects such as cracks and roots also are avenues for infiltration, and those are assigned a slight infiltration number as well too.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to clarify that the charts that we're looking at with these estimated infiltration numbers aren't necessarily actual infiltration numbers, they're estimated. And I was just trying to figure out if there was any back correlation to the original flow monitoring to see if these estimates are in line with what we picked up during the flow monitoring.
I think I'm gonna jump in maybe, Lindsay, and just it's hard to correlate it, I think, to the flow metering that we did, but Ed actually picked up something really smart when we did this presentation for him initially, just to present our findings. In doing kind of a reality check, I know you guys look at what's the metered flow to Stanford and then what's the Aquarian water usage, right?
Yes.
So we did try to do a sanity check of, using our assumptions for infiltration numbers. Are we in the ballpark of what we would have expected to see given the amount of town that we're looking at under this study? And I think that sanity check did work out.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question. On the last column, what is that a percentage of? Because 35 out of 52 is higher than 16.
So yes, that is, thank you for asking that question. It's not of the meter area, it is of the total 221 manholes that had a grade of 3 or higher. So for example, in Leroy Avenue, there was 35 that had a grade 3 or higher, and that 35 is 16% of the 221. So of that 221, Leroy Avenue represents 16%, Mansfield Avenue represents 13%, so on and so on. With an average of 50%
Okay.
of all the manholes having a grade of 3 or higher.
Okay. Well, but you can't add down to get 50. I'm sorry. It's okay. It just doesn't add down or work
So
across.
the two that should say, so the 220, the 50% represents the 221 of the 441 that were inspected. So of all the 441 manholes that were inspected, 221 or 50% of the manholes had a grade of 3 or higher.
Got it. So yeah.
I got it, but then the columns should add one way or the other, and they don't. They don't add down.
36% is 80 divided by 160. 13% is 28 divided by 41. You cannot add them down.
Correct.
No. Okay.
Yes, the column heading
All
should
right.
be different. It should say, percent of manholes inspected, grade 3 or higher.
Because in the handout, instead of 50%, it says 100%.
We did update that, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, on to some scary looking pictures, but don't worry, these have been these have been rehabbed. So I did mention, as we were going through the videos, or even when we were on site sometimes too, we were right away, we asked the CCTV sub and the manhole sub, if you find anything that is needs immediate attention, please let us know right away. So some of these defects were identified right away, some were during closer review. So we did notify the town, we let them know of these critical defects, and all of the ones identified here have been repaired or are planned to be repaired. And I just talk through the pictures quickly. The first one is showing a significantly offset joint. There's not a lot of flow getting by there with, rocks and soil visible. There was also infiltration here present as well. The middle picture is of a fracture in the pipe it had probably about 10 gallons a minute of infiltration coming in there. And then the last picture is a partial collapse. There was a little bit of flow that was able to get by. Luckily, this picture on the bottom, this was of a manhole that was probably there's probably only a couple houses connected right here onto the line. So that was good that it was identified and repaired quickly so it didn't impact service to any of the residents. All right, next slide. A kind of area that we wanted to have a slide in and of itself. This is about Old Kings Highway South. It's in the Stony Brook meter area. This whole area, this whole street had some critical defects. Starting at, there's a manhole a little south of Andrews Drive. I believe it's the manhole that Vanessa had in her health and safety moment. And that's where the 5-mile pump station force main discharges. And then it runs approximately 3,500 linear feet. I think it's about 17 segments to Boston Post Road. All of the pipes and manholes and most of the service connections are deteriorating due to the hydrogen sulfide levels. This is because of the force main discharge at the top of this line. And it ranges from early stages to more significant deterioration. The more significant deterioration is shown in these pictures. The top one is of the pipe that is delaminating. It's where, a layer of the pipe. It's not the entire piece of pipe falling off, but it is a layer of it, just due to the asbestos cement construction. That's what happens when it starts to degrade. The middle picture is of a service connection. I know it's a little difficult to see, but it is basically when the asbestos cement starts to deteriorate, it also swells. So it's just showing a little bit of the pipe swelling, and it's about to delaminate. And the bottom photo is, it's hard to see, but it is showing some kind of section loss of the manhole wall where it's starting to thin out and flake off as well. So again, the other good news is that this has been flagged for, we are in the middle of planning and design to rehabilitate this whole area as soon as possible. We did do some additional investigations, lateral inspections to augment the mainline CCTV inspections to assist with identifying, the extent of the hydrogen sulfide damage in the lateral connections. Based on the initial review and discussions, we don't anticipate having to do any excavation work of the mainline pipes or service connections. So that's really good news on this front. So we're moving along, getting design pulled together, and hopefully, as quickly as we can get this out to bid and construction. Right. So next is the overall rehab recommendations, costs, and kind of the next steps. I'll talk on the rehab recommendations. We've taken a look at the Sscs findings. I'm not going to go into high level or a lot of detail on the process of the rehab analysis. That's kind of a whole presentation in and of itself. We do cover that in this section 4 and 5, the analysis that we did to arrive at the rehab recommendations. But I did want to quickly note that the review wasn't done in a vacuum. While we did assess each pipe segment and each manhole, we, afterwards took a step back. It's a holistic approach that was really taken into consideration to develop the overall cost-effective rehab recommendations program. So I just want to have everyone keep that in mind. So this table here is the summary of the pipeline rehabilitation recommendations for each meter area. I'm sure most of you are not familiar with abbreviations and you may not be able to see the footnotes too well. So I'll talk through them from left to right. It's chemical root treatment, grinding service connections, cured in place pipelining, which is pipelining from manhole to manhole, reinstating service connections, test and sealing service connections, cured in place spot repairs, which is doing an isolated repair to a defect, cured in place lateral lining, that's lining of a lateral. It can be either a few feet or upwards to 30 or 40 feet. And then dig spot repair, which is obviously it's in a location where you can't utilize a trenchless technology rehab method. Unfortunately, it requires excavation at that point. So of the 5 meter areas, it's recommended that approximately 27,000 linear feet to be lined manhole to manhole. And this is to mitigate I&I and also address structural issues and improve the system reliability. So that lining quantity is almost about 50% of what was CCTV inspected, and overall, almost about 60% of the pipe segments that were inspected are recommended for some type of rehabilitation. So you can see a majority of the rehab recommendations are full pipe lining. Any questions? I'm gonna move on to manholes. All right, on to manholes.
Wait a minute, I actually have a question on
Yes.
this. Why isn't, so Old Kings Highway isn't on here, that would up it, correct? The Old Kings Highway South?
That
The one that
is,
you're already,
Cam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is included in Stony Brook. It has, the work hasn't been done yet, so I believe that is still included in that total.
Yeah,
Stony
so
Brook.
on this table, so Old Kings Highway is actually within the Stony Brook meter area. And so
Okay.
it was during those investigations when we found out that H2S was pretty bad. And so we pulled that
Okay.
out as a critical area.
Without having a map in front of me, I think of Stony Brook somewhere else, so that's okay. That's just from living here too long.
Yeah, Stony Brook
Sorry.
meter area
Sorry.
encompasses, I think it's all the way from like Leroy Avenue, where Boston Post Road meets Leroy Avenue, all the way down to the Stony Brook pump station, inclusive of, you know, Renshaw Road, Park Place, all of that. Hecker, near the 95 on-ramp. So it's a big area.
Okay,
All
thank you.
Yep. On to manholes. All right, so for manholes, rehab methods, we have frame and cover work that includes, it could include resetting, raising manhole covers, or also replacing the frame and covers either with a standard cover or a watertight frame and cover. There's chimney seals, which is it's about 2 feet below the frame. That's considered the chimney, and that's sealed. Cementitious lining is lining of the entire manhole. That is, if you see the quantity there, that's actually in vertical feet, not each manhole. Epoxy coating is recommended in areas with high hydrogen sulfide. That's a protective coating to protect the manhole. Next is grout injection of the manhole. This can be done in isolated areas. It can be done just at the pipe connection, the invert, the wall, basically wherever that infiltration is coming in. Or you can do, basically the entire manhole. Typically, that's recommended more for precast manholes, and cementitious lining is for brick or block, just due to the number of avenues infiltration can come in through brick and block. All of that grout, it's much more cost-effective and long-term solution to cementitious line. And then the last is doing any repairs to the bench and invert. So total-wise, it's not included on here, but of the 417 manholes that were inspected, approximately 226 manholes, or 54%, are recommended for at least one type of rehabilitation. All right, that's it. I'm going to hand it off to Scott now. I think this is probably what everyone's waiting for. He's going to talk over the rehabilitation cost estimate and preliminary schedule that we put together.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. Haven't seen you in a while, many of you. But yeah, here's the rehabilitation cost estimate, and the next slide will be the schedule. But we broke this into, we spoke with Ed and Darren about how to phase this, and I guess the conclusion was basically do it the way we often do it. We do this with a lot of communities throughout New England, throughout the country. And so we structured a five-phase rehabilitation program. And you're at liberty to adjust this any way you see fit. If you want to do it more quickly and invest more money up front, certainly that's your option. We typically break it into, if you look at the far right-hand column, like $1 million or so projects is what typically communities have an appetite for. Some go bigger, some go small, some do, $250,000 projects, and that's all they want to do. They're smaller communities. They don't want to invest right away. They're not in any rush. But going down the left-hand column, you got the 5 phases, and it's broken out by study area, basically. But the way we prioritized phases 1 through 5, 1 being first, 5 being last, was we used criteria that we typically utilize, and 4 in general were the overall infiltration rate in each of these study areas. You want to get the biggest bang for your buck as quickly as possible. So infiltration rate, the NASCO ratings, you've heard Lindsay refer a number of times. But NASCO, NASSCO is the National Association of Sanitary Sewer Contractors, I think anyway. I haven't looked that up in a while. But that's an association that came up with all these ratings and rankings and procedures for evaluating infiltration and structural issues in sanitary sewer systems. So again, 3 and greater, the more critical defects. We also looked at geographical location. We don't want to jump between different study areas. You don't get as good of prices from the contractor if they have to remobilize from the northern part of town to the southern part of town and east to west. So we try to keep it geographically cohesive. So that's the 3rd criteria. And the last one was known problem areas. Problem areas where you folks and your DPW have indicated you've had DOE and backups or overflows. So we put those 4 criteria together and we phased it this way. And the bottom line is we came up with about the very low right-hand column, came up with about $4.3 million worth of work. And just to point out the difference between The second from the right in the far right column, the construction cost estimate is just in raw 2022 or 2021 dollars. And the total project cost estimate includes things like construction contingency, administrative costs, engineering, design and oversight of construction. So all those things, midpoint to the escalation to the midpoint of construction, where this is a 4-year program for 5 phases. And again, we can talk about that. And that's really where we're going to be looking for input from you folks, is as to how you want to phase this. If you have higher priorities than what we came up with, this is where we want to engage the client and get your feedback on what's more important to you if it's not the way we have laid it out. So we're not necessarily looking for answers tonight. I know there's a lot of information we're hitting you with. First time you've heard from us in a long time. You've got a good sized report, and that's even without appendices to peruse. So you can come up with ideas and thoughts. You can discuss it tonight, or you can look it over, and we'll wait till we hear back from Ed and Darren and go from there. So that's basically the rundown of all the costs that we have. And again, we've quantified the linear feet of pipe and the number of manholes and the estimated infiltration that we identified in each of those study areas.
Before talking about this table, which I think is a good conversation, and I'm excited to have it. You want to touch on private inflow, which was, there were a few, I think there was a section in the report on private inflow, because that's another part of this discussion, page before, how that affects how we can affect change there. So just kind of give us the overview of what you found.
Sure. I think one of the slides, did we leave that in? And by the way, I have to publicly apologize to Lindsay about, I think, Bob, you had the question about the 50%. She originally had those percentages adding up to 100. I looked at the bottom line, as I'm prone to do, and said 200 out of 400 is 50%. Of course, it depends on how long you look at it and which way you look at it. But I think we did identify somewhere in this presentation, Lindsay, perhaps one of your slides, we didn't identify a whole lot of private inflow sources within the areas, the studies we did. But that's not because they don't exist necessarily, Craig. It could be because we didn't get into the homes. We didn't do.
I guess the one question I understood, you have very specific guidance on properties that where you were, pretty clearly able to identify potential sources of inflow. But then there was another, I'm trying to find my notes on it, like 100 and some odd properties that you categorized as kind of suspected inflow. And my understanding is that just was a cursory observation from the exterior. And I guess I'm trying to figure out what the follow-ups are on properties that have suspected inflow.
So, who wants to take it?
Smoke testing.
So
It's yours,
it's a hot potato. Yeah.
So I'll have to check the exact number.
2.6.2. There we go.
But most of those properties were visited as part of the follow-on dye testing investigations. So that 121 or so were flagged during the smoke testing. That's because they couldn't see where the roof leaders go into the ground, the foundation drains, things like that, where it goes somewhere, but we can't see where the discharge point is. So that's why that's a high number. And those are sometimes, sources of inflow. So those were included as part of the follow-on investigations for dye testing. And so I think most of those properties, except for maybe like 3 maybe or so, were visited. The residential properties.
Okay, so you did actually whittle down that list from like 121 to 9.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot shorter. I think that also included some of those suspect sources was also commercial flat roofs. And I think all but one or two as well were visited. And that's part of our short list as well too, to see, if we can get our sub back out there just to, one more day to wrap up and see if they can get to those last few
Okay,
properties.
so that's not as, there's not a big, okay, I had
Correct. You guys
misinterpreted
don't have
that.
a list of 120 houses that you need to go to and knock on doors.
Okay,
No.
at least not yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
And Lindsay,
So-
just to follow up on that, Craig, if you're all set.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any way that the smoke testing or anything would reveal sump pumps connected through the interior sewer in the house? I mean, if it has a trap or some sort of a check valve, smoke's not going to come flying out their basement and they're call the police. So we're almost not able to ever find those connections, are we?
Correct. I have seen on some occasions just defective connections and things like that where, we do see it, but no, for the most part, identifying sump pumps is through an internal building inspection, going house to house or building to building, which we did for some of those flat roofs, those 8 or 9 flat roofs. Internal building inspections were performed, and it wasn't 7 properties, but 7 total sump pumps were identified. So it does go to show smoke testing didn't show anything, but there were suspects because the roof drains went into the earth. Flat roofs couldn't see where the drain was, did an internal building inspection, was identified the sump pumps and saw that it connected directly to the sanitary line and not to an outside, outside on the ground or wherever it should go.
So when you're actually netting water use to flows to Stanford and assuming infiltration, there's no way to include sump pumps in that calculation.
They estimated that 700 and something thousand, that's an infiltration estimate. It did not include inflow estimate of the sources
Okay,
that
got
we
it.
identified.
So you're
But
just you're looking at existing conditions and hypothesizing about what a manhole would typically produce or a broken pipe and modeling it backwards that way rather than looking at water use and net flows and getting their X sump pumps. So there's no way to add sump pumps in one way or the other, is there?
Well, yeah. Is there a way to, I guess through the flow testing, was there a way to isolate neighbors? I mean, I guess we did that we isolated neighborhoods where we thought inflow was high.
Yeah, and that's a hard, so where you typically see it is in the delayed inflow. So it's not that immediate quick spike of flow rates going up right when it starts raining. That's usually your catch basins, your roof, things that are going right into the system. Some pumps you're going to see as part of the delayed inflow, but it's hard to say that all of that is due to sump pumps. It could be the fact that it is ground, it's raining, it's seeping into the ground and then getting in through cracks in the pipe. That's part of it as well too. There's other causes for it, so it's hard to say that all of that delayed inflow is related to sump pumps.
And if we've done in the past, we do it less frequently now than we did years ago, but if you're really looking for sump pumps, you look at the high inflow areas and you do comprehensive building inspections there. But that's something that you want to be fully committed to doing before you go forward with.
That would be very, very difficult to do.
Exactly.
We've nibbled at that, and they're people's homes, and unless there's a reason to be invited, like a building permit or a sale or something else that triggers an event where a third party is able to put eyes on, it's difficult.
Yep. You finished my thought. Exactly.
So, but I guess could there be? You guys have the data. Are you able to at least say if this is an area that we wanted to investigate in the future? Here are the neighborhoods to target for that type of investigation, or give you an out. Maybe I shouldn't. Do we make these improvements, do another flow test to validate the improvements that we made? And if we still have a problem in some of these high inflow neighborhoods, then that's the second step.
I think that's generally what we would recommend, because there is a lot of ordinance work associated with actually putting teeth to forcing people to disconnect sump pumps, right? And getting momentum behind that, right, and the laws in place that make that possible, we would usually look at it in tandem, right? And the sump pumps are a big part of the CMOM process as well, right? Is there an ordinance in place? Is there a penalty or fine, right? So we'll continue to be looking at that with DPW as part of the CMOM process, but that would be our advice, is to look at it from a legal perspective first, work on your pipelining and infiltration, addressing those issues, and then circle back to sump pumps as a continued conversation.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one other weird question, and I'm not sure this is the right time. Have you ever overlaid the wetlands map on the sewer shed map and noticed that there may or may not be increased problems and or sump pumps and or whatever in areas that are wetland soils?
So we do actually include the wetlands on some of our maps. Definitely during the planning process and trying to identify follow-on investigations. Part of that inflow, where we're going to do the follow-on CCTV inspections, we're not only looking at like that segment, what's the number at? We're also looking at the adjacent segments. Are there water bodies nearby? What is the pipe material? So that definitely comes into consideration with even our rehab recommendations too. So that is part of it.
Thank you.
So before we get to a conversation about the phasing, let me just go through the commission members to see if they have any questions related to the data that got us here. So we're not talking about the phasing yet, but just making sure everybody is square on how we got to this point. So Susan, do you have any questions at this point?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Bob, do you feel comfortable where we're at? Do you have any clarifications needed?
No, I'm comfortable at the moment.
Okay, Reese, I assume you're
Yeah,
good?
I'm good. Thank you, Greg.
Ed, where you are? There you are. Sorry, trying to find you on in my little thumbnails here. I want you to pipe in if I say anything crazy, but to me, I would be interested in performing these repairs as quickly as we could logistically handle. I would personally be comfortable bonding the entire amount and doing it all within 2 years. And I see no reason to wait. We get great low ratings on our bonds. That might be ticking up in the near term. So that's kind of where I started. Why not tackle it all? Now, we have consultants that need to prepare design plans. We have staff members that need to oversee the process. We have contractors that need to do the work. Let's see, I've got a little caller 2 has some feedback. I don't know who caller 2 is, but I'm going to mute caller 2 because of the feedback. Caller 2 is left. Okay. So that's my starting point. Convince me that that's a bad idea.
Craig, I don't know where to start because you didn't really say anything that was crazy, or let me say anything that I hadn't said myself to Team Arcadis, if you will. I said, and Vanessa, if you would, could you just hop to the next slide? I hate doing this to you guys, but let's show what a general approach would be. I think Scott put together a very reasonable schedule. Let's say, you do the design, you bid it, you construct it, and you hop to the phases. And I looked at the 48 months window, the 4-year window, and I said, I like conservative, but I just don't think that's going to fare well with our sewer commissioners, because I think they're going to want to do it faster. And I don't think you're wrong in thinking we can get this done a little bit quicker. It's going to entail a little bit more work, maybe a lot more work. But I think you hit it right on by saying that right now is the time to strike, especially with the rates where they are for us. There is one more little component to the construction part of it. I really don't want to steal Vanessa's thunder on that with regards to the grant program that they have possibly coming forward. I wanted her to speak on that, so I'm gonna stop myself for a second. Maybe she can give us just a little bit of insight to that to help you maybe better understand about the phasing right now and where the town could possibly get some additional funding.
I'd be happy to, and I'm actually going to skip to our last next step slide because as we're talking, I thought it was really amazing. We touched on, I think, all of these without anyone being prompted to talk about next steps. So yeah, the point about deep review and funding opportunities that Ed brought up is a good one, right? Because there's a lot of momentum right now on the bipartisan infrastructure law, right? The BIL. And we're hearing that unlike ARPA, that money is going to go roll through state revolving fund or clean water fund in Connecticut, not be directed to towns specifically and allocated that way. So I think there's a good possibility while in the last several revisions of Clean Water Fund priority list, collection system design and implementation projects were loan only, in which case it probably wouldn't make sense to pursue deep funding. That may change with the new money that's coming out, and there is a high potential that it would have a grant component with it. But that's not to say that you should wait, right? Because nothing is set in stone there. So I think that was just a consideration, right? I think we're already moving forward to this first bullet with the design and implementation of what we called phase 1, which is Old Kings Highway, right? So that's underway. But yeah, we can be flexible. I think consolidating phases, right? Making 2 and 3 one phase and 3 and 4 a subsequent one would definitely be doable from our perspective. It's, I think, just going to be a balancing act for bonding versus other funding sources.
I think about, I look at this as a start. We have to continue for the next 9 years or whatever the agreement was to video 8 miles of sewers every year. We have other sewer sheds that we have not flow monitored that we should flow monitor to look for problems. We haven't seen the CMOM report yet, and I'm guessing, you correct me if I'm wrong, that's where recommendations on the pump stations may be, because we don't have those in this report.
The full pump station report will be an appendix to the Sscs report. So when you get this full document, you will have the pump station right up in there as well.
I spent some time with Darren and Ed and some other members of our sewer department walking through the Stony Brook pump station and the Weed Beach pump station, specifically thinking about hardening those stations relative to flooding. And there are some significant dollars there too. So I guess I'm saying, if we happen to bond some money and spent it a year or two before grant monies became available, we're going to have projects down the line that we're going to be able to avail ourselves of for grant monies. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
That makes sense.
And we were already kind of going down the road with phase 1, and we want to get that up and running and out the door first, and then we can focus on how much stuff can we reasonably put in the next contract.
Craig, I think looking at our bonding right now, I put in for $2.3 million for bonding. It was approved, and working right now on the agreement for clean water funds. So it appears that that money would be coming through. It leaves us just under $2 million worth of construction funds, where I think phase 2 and phase 3, if you use the total project cost estimate that Scott has shown here, is something we can cover with the bonding money that we have in place right now. So it looks like we're going to get the ARPA funds for phase one. It still looks really good as of today's meeting.
Mhm.
Phase two, phase three, it looks like we have the bonding already set in place for those two. So I think we have a really, really good start at this. But I like your idea though of making sure we lock the money in at a lower rate. It's a little scary right now.
So with that description, if we kind of went status quo in terms of where we're looking at funding right now, we would collapse 5 phases to 3 phases. So we would continue on with phase one, cross our fingers that it's going to be paid for with the ARPA grant. We would immediately follow on in the very near term with creating a contract package for phase two and phase three, with the other understanding that we have an RTM approved bond amount to cover that. And then the third phase would be 4 and 5.
So I have a question for the Arcadis folks. Have in putting these phases together, I mean, we go out to bid for Old Kings Highway South. That's going to be standalone. I want to get that out on the road bid, get our lowest bidder in, get them under contract, get them started. So we take phase two and phase three. Do we bid them separately with maybe an opportunity of getting 2 separate contractors in here at the same time doing this work, or is that a little bit too much to handle?
Well, we could do that. We've done that not often. It could get a little bit challenging, I guess, having 2 contractors working in town at the same time, especially if those 2 study areas are adjacent and
Closing roads,
yeah.
traffic control.
Closing roads, detours,
town
school
monitoring.
buses. Exactly. Whose fault is this traffic jam? But it's certainly not insurmountable, Ed.
Well, I guess the question is a $2 million contract too big for too many contractors where we're not going to get good prices, or we're limiting our ability to go to certain contractors, or we're going to be stuck over a 2-year period anyway because it's too much work for one contractor?
No to the first 2 parts of what you said, I think. We're not going to, we may squeeze out some contractors that already have a lot on their plate and can only absorb a $500,000 or $1 million project. So we may squeeze some out, but $2 million, the bigger question you had, $2 million is not too big. We do $3 million contracts. Often New Haven, we're doing one right now, $3.5 million project. And we had plenty of bidders. I think we had 5 or 6 bidders for that, competitive prices. The answer to the last part of your question, Craig, though, could be unfortunately yes, that the contractors content to fall behind when they take on a large contract like this, $2 million, and they're still working on other contracts. Like say, for instance, our contract we have going in another community nearby is finishing up a contract. They have several months left. They bid this one because they're looking for something down the road. They don't finish ours on time. That translates into, or they don't finish the previous one. That translates into Darien delaying. So we have seen delays, not just because of COVID and people being sick and shutdowns and all that other stuff, but just because some contractors they bid on more than they can complete in the time allotted, really.
Yeah. You have one manhole rehab crew, or let's say you have multiple, but you're not going to give us 2, right? The other crew is going to be in another town, so they're only going to get so many manholes done over a certain period of time.
Exactly, and they jump around. I mean, they've done it for us. We've had emergencies, and they pull a crew off of a project for a week or whatever because we had a major collapse somewhere, and we're not the only ones they do that for.
I guess honestly, to me, well, I guess that's back to Ed's question. Do we have 2 separate contracts or one? I mean, if you feel strongly one way or the other, Ed, you're the guy that has to manage this, so I'm going to defer to you. But it feels like just one bid package, one contractor, and we'll just do our best to work the schedule.
Right, 2 contractors would be double the number of meetings, double the number of pay recs you have to process, double the number of pay recs you have to chase.
I think soft costs are likely to be higher as you guys are preparing 2 separate packages and monitoring 2 separate packages.
Right. Yep.
Craig, just to jump back into your question there, your 30,000 square foot view here, 30,000 foot view here of what the total need will be for funding once you add the pump stations in. Do you guys from our case have like a spitball estimate of what the pump station rehabs to harden them might be, so that we could come up with like a sort of a full number? And to Craig's point, rates are going to rise. If we could bond something now, it might make more sense, even more.
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't want to just throw out a number on that because I know there is some work at both Stony Brook and Nearwater that wouldn't need to be done, right? Pumps, I think, were recently replaced, so that's not in the mix. I think a generator upgrade might be on your radar already, Ed, right, for those stations.
Yeah.
So we could certainly come up with some guidance to give you to carry cost-wise, but I don't want to just throw something random out there and be way
I'm
off.
not, based on at least the conversations I had in the field with Ed and Darren, I don't know if we know what the scope is yet. We're in the early parts of deciding what the scope is, but it's not insubstantial. It's not insubstantial. We're going to spend some money on those two stations, as we should. They're the two most critical pieces of the entire infrastructure. I mean, I don't mean to give anybody the impression that those stations are not in good shape. They're in great shape. It's really the flood zone question for both of them that presents the weakness that has to be solved.
And I think, Craig, you're going to find in that report a lot of the pump stations their issues are kind of related to that same question about flood protection. That's why we looked at Stony Brook and Nearwater first. They kind of raised our eyebrows to from the report and from what's happened over the last 6 months here in New England, and making sure that we protect this. I think Vanessa's correct. We just can't throw a number at that. We do have some bigger ticket items that we need to look at, but the flood protection of those two locations are important.
Yeah, just to give the commissioners just some idea of what we're talking about without driving a huge tangent here. The Stony Brook pump station during Ida in September had water that just started to come in the front door by a half an inch or an inch, and that floor is full of all the electrical controls and panels that run that pump station. We're probably super lucky that we didn't lose the transformer. It, for some reason, kept on humming. So, we now know those storms are not theory, they're reality. The question comes how high we can lift it, right? I mean, everything in there. We talked about short-term hardening, some ways to easily surround the building, lift up the generator, lift up the transformer, harden the building up to the windowsills. That all sounds great, and that would give us 2 feet of freeboard over Ida, but it's not compliant with the flood zone regs. Flood zone regs would tell you to go even higher, and to go even higher, there's no easy path. That's the hard path. And we have a similar situation at Weed Beach, where the new 2013 flood zone maps put the water level of the regulatory base flood elevation 3 feet above the first floor, and we would have to be 1 foot above that to comply with the regs. So we're talking about trying to figure out how to lift everything up 4 feet at Weed Beach. So that gets into structure and logistics and everything else. We have some great ideas for how to do it from our first initial walkthrough, but these aren't, these are real contracts. Also, there's going to be more money here.
No, I'll just throw into the mix there too, and it may be on your radar already, but TR16, which is the guidance that we use for wastewater facility design, even goes beyond that, right? So they'll say 3 feet above the 100-year flood or base flood elevation for critical equipment, which would be generators, pump controls, right? All that stuff. So it's significant, but we have some really cool examples of generator platforms and things that we've done, not yet into construction, but in renderings inside pump station buildings where everything is elevated inside the building, and we kind of put another level on with a roof. So aesthetically, it's not so jarring, right? But we can help you guys with some ideas and brainstorming there for sure.
Yep. So I'll open it up to the only remaining question is, so we kind of have a discussion going where we have 3 phases instead of 5. You know, I'm in the back of my head, I'm still toying with 2 phases instead of 3, but I think I'm okay with 3. Any comments from the commission members on this discussion or the phasing or cost or how quickly to get this done?
I agree with you that, I mean, these are all projects that need to be done and should be done sooner rather than later for the reason that of the I&I, in my opinion, and for the reason that the bonding rates are good. So I would agree with you, Greg, that that shortening the 48-month window is the way to go with all 5 of them.
Susan or Reese, any thoughts?
I'm on board with it.
Yeah, I am too, Craig.
It kind of
I
sounds
think
like
it would be nice to have a back of the envelope return on investment for every dollar spent. There's this much return at a 3%, 4% bond rate, whatever it would be, so that you could explain to the person on the street that this is money well spent. Immediately, we're lowering costs.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 components in my mind. Look, we in terms of phase 1, we found critical maintenance that has to occur immediately, and that has nothing to do with ROI and everything, even though there might be a little bit, and everything to do with just keeping your system in good condition. But it would be interesting in terms of your estimated inflow and infiltration rates, what you think we would be able to knock down and what that savings would be in a year, just to kind of understand that calculus. Is it a 15-year ROI, a 5-year ROI, or that's not the way to look at it? I would actually be curious of the answer to that question.
And I wonder if Lindsay or Cam want to jump in. One thing we didn't talk about in this overview in the slide deck was the analysis that we did for transport and treat. And in this case, it was really more of a treat strict cost analysis, because we just really looked at what the cost was paid to Stanford for treatment of the flows. But that kind of factored into, and that's something that DEEP always looks for, so we included it in the report always. But Lindsay or Cam, if you want to jump in and just explain what we did for that analysis and maybe point to some sections in the report.
Yeah, I can jump in and Cam can correct me if anything's incorrect. But yeah, section 4 really focuses on that cost effectiveness analysis. And so basically what we had done is, we came up with unit prices for every aspect of the rehabilitation. So we made a rehabilitation recommendations, assigned a cost for each segment, what that would cost, and compared it to the treatment rate based upon what's being paid to Stanford. And so anything over, I believe it was a ratio of 1, was considered cost effective to rehab over, I think it's a 20-year of paying for it to be treated. And that actually covered everything that was that rating of 3 and greater as well too. Cam, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think except for a few isolated segments, maybe anything that we identified with infiltration or inflow, in addition to that overall pipe rating of 3, was considered cost effective to be repaired.
And that's based on the 20-year life or the 20-year analysis.
Yes.
And again, it wouldn't include any of the O&M costs, right? We didn't even go to that level of detail.
This is
but
straight the check we write to Stanford every year.
Correct.
There's a return on investment for us in the long term to do this work. Question is there an average? Is it like exactly 20 years or less, or is it kind of like 17 years or 13 years? Is there any way to look at that, or is that math too hard?
Some of those rehabilitation methods that we use, they're actually, a lot of them are predicted to last up to 50 years. So we're almost extending beyond that 20-year treat estimate that we come up with. So that cost-effective analysis could even be extended out to 50 years. But we use 20 years because that's what DEEP asks for, and that's what we like to see.
I guess the question is if we're going to spend $4 million, how many years will it take to not pay Stanford that $4 million?
And I think we have the numbers that we could give you that answer, right? We just
so that's gonna be a follow-up. Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
So to me, Ed and Arcadis, first of all, thank you so much. I love data, and I'm an engineer, but this is fantastic, well presented, well organized, exactly what we were hoping for at the end of this 18-month period, 2-year period. But it sounds to me like the consensus is go as fast as practically possible. That don't let money allocation in any given year be the thing that stops you, right? If it's Arcadis being able to do design plans, if it's you being able to oversee contractors in the field, if it's the ability to get the right size contractors doing the right size work, those are reasons to work a phasing plan. But worrying about us and approving money is not one of them.
Loud and clear.
I mean, quick off the back of the Matchbox math, if shows that the INI from these projects is like 270 million gallons a year, which is more than a quarter of what we send to Stanford. So I really think the limiting factor in our ROI is going to be the minimum that we have to pay to Stanford.
Yeah, we can only go down, a certain percentage until we're able to figure out how to renegotiate, but we're really not going to be able to renegotiate until we have proof in the pudding.
Well, but that's if they're ever going to allow us to go that low.
Yeah, at some point. Well, anyway, every once in a while, I try to imagine that reasonable people will do reasonable things presented with reasonable information. But, call me an optimist. And Reese is laughing hysterically in the background, for the record. My next set of questions is, what do we do next? Ed, we have another 8 miles to video. Which 8 miles are we videoing? Do we have a time? Should we be asking what are the next 8 miles that we video this year, next year, the following year? When do we turn our attention to the other sewer sheds and start some inflow programs there? I feel like if we start the DEP process now, it'd be next spring that we're doing the inflow program for some other sewer shed. I don't want to lose, I don't want to lose momentum just because, oh yeah, we're focused on Stony Brook and that's it. We have more to look at.
Interesting. Let me see if I can wrap my hands around this and present it properly. I know when we started this and looked at this, I think Craig, you and I talked about time on this, how much time is going to be spent and how much time do you think we need to get through the whole system in here. And I always put a number of 5 to 10 years of doing this program and doing it right. I mean, I think that was important to us all going forward. I still believe we're still in that range. And as we go through this first portion of doing construction and lining and manhole rehab and so on, and getting a good feel of what it actually takes to do the design, do the bid, manage the contractor, finish the project, that's going to give me a better feel of how this is going to go. This is lining 300 feet of pipe on Boston Post Road is nothing in comparison to the amount of work that needs to be done here. So I'm going to get a better feel for that. On the help of Arcadis, we're all going to get a better feel for that. What I think is important to understand is I'm right alongside you. If we can get the next phase, if you will, of where to go next as we're doing this construction, that's what I want to do. And I think we've talked about that all along, overlapping these. But what I can't do, though, is bite off more than I can chew. If I do that, this project will suffer. The other projects I'm working on will suffer. And all in all, I'll not get what I want out of all of these things I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to be patient, but I'm like you, I'm trying to hurry. And Vanessa's going to smile in a second, but this is all things that we talked about on the meeting of the day, is how do we get this to move a little faster? What is our next steps? So, because the chairman's going to ask that. The sewer commission members are going to want to know. And I think we've got a good foothold. We're headed in the right direction, but I think these next couple months are going to be critical to understanding what it takes to do a design and bid, get a good contract in there, and get a feel for what they're doing. And I think that's
a little bit because it's fun. We're obligated to do more video work each year.
Yeah.
So that needs to be an ongoing contract, whether we like it or not. So having a recommendation of saying this next 8 miles, like maybe for the next 3 years, here are the different 8 miles that you might do. And then, or whatever the number was, actually, I forgot. I got to go back and read that language, but you know what I'm talking about. Maybe it's less than 8 miles a year, but
it's 8 miles.
Okay.
8 miles a year.
And then the second part of that is, this initial inflow or this initial flow monitoring was done 2 years ago. And what I'm suggesting is if we start now telling the DEP we want to do more flow monitoring and another SSES, it's not this spring, it's next spring. So like the inflow or the flow monitoring now is 3 years apart from each other. And then that takes, a year and a half to get us results. And so by the time we have those results, we might be done with this first round of work, right? Like, so I don't want to be flat-footed and then miss another year because we're, ideally flow monitoring in March, April, May. Anyway. Because we could always phase out the construction once we get the recommendations.
I don't want to miss the important feature of our friends at the regulators that are watching us do this type of work, with the hopes that we don't fail to meet our requirements through that consent decree. So I understand that, and with I think Arcadis' help, I'm gonna take some of their direction to see where to head with our next 8 miles. I'm going to need their help to do that, because what I don't want to do is do work in an area that is not going to be beneficial to our program or not going to be beneficial to phase 2.
Yeah,
so I think that's important.
On the one hand, the SSES study is exactly the way we wanted to do it, because it gives you the best bang for your buck on spending these dollars. So there might be some inefficiencies associated with our agreement to do this, comprehensive video scoping. On the other hand, when we video things, we have often been finding things that make us go, oh, wow, we didn't know that was there. We better fix it. So it might not be as much bang for our buck on inflow and infiltration, but I bet we uncover, a bunch of unique situations that need fixing.
I agree with you. And just so you know, I put in money to do camera work for this past year, which I didn't need to use because it turned out to be part of the SSES phase 1. So I still have that $125,000 sitting there to do the next year's camera work of 8 miles. if it doesn't fall within a portion of phase 2. So, which I don't think we're going to have up and running. So I think this year is going to be our out of pocket to do 8 miles. It's just getting some guidance from Arcadis, which they offered to help me do, and it put us in an area where it will be beneficial to either the town or to phase 2. But we'll work out those details before we get too close to the end of the year.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, any other closing comments or thoughts? We're looking forward to, now should next meeting be in person only, period, no hybrid option? 2 thumbs up from Reese, 2 thumbs up from Susan. Can't see Bob's thumbs.
I'll be there.
So there you go. You might, Darren, let Jim Cameron know that he's going to be responsible for recording the meeting now. Other than that, I guess, Arcadis, thank you very much. Did you have any other comments or thoughts before we close the meeting?
I'd like to make one more suggestion, Craig, before I don't need to interrupt them. I do enjoy being able to do a presentation like this.
Yes.
You know, on the screen, looking to share screen, going through it, and having it recorded for people to see. I think that's a benefit for not only us but the residents too, because it's always been hard to get the coordination between the PowerPoint and the presentation going. So I do enjoy this part, but I will say that I do miss seeing your faces in person.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting. I agree with you, Ed. So I'm not suggesting that we come back in person and we don't entertain hybrid or virtual in the future, because I think for a presentation like this, virtual was very helpful. Not only we didn't have to make Arcadis commute here to Darien, but we could pay attention to what they wanted us to pay attention to, and it is recorded. So I agree.
I agree as well. I think to have people drive down from wherever you are versus being able to sit or in your offices or at home makes a lot of sense.
And we've all gotten good at GoToMeeting. It was almost seamless.
All right, Mr. Kraus, did you have anything you wanted to opine on now that your video's on?
Nothing at all. No, my audio's been on, but nothing at all today.
All right, thank you, sir, for
Actually excited to kind of learn and get involved in the process. So thanks for letting me join.
Of course. All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make a motion to
I'll
adjourn.
make such motion.
Second.
I guess Susan gets the first, Bob gets the second. Reese, you just get to vote aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
You can stop
Thank you,
recording
Arcadis.
now.
5:59.
Thank you guys so much from Arcadis. You guys have done a wonderful job. It's beautiful.